Brown versus Board of Education, 1954 ended racial segregation in U.S. schools. Introduction: the fight for equality in education. The landmark Brown versus Board of Education case, decided by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1954, was a monumental step in the civil rights movement and a turning point in the fight for racial equality in America. The ruling declared that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional, thus overturning the long-standing Plessy versus Ferguson decision, 1896, that had established the separate but equal doctrine. This decision not only ended legal segregation in schools but also served as a catalyst for broader social and political changes aimed at dismantling institutional racism. 1. The context: segregation and the civil rights movement. The legacy of Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896. In 1896, the Plessy versus Ferguson ruling had entrenched the legal foundation for racial segregation in the United States under the doctrine of separate but equal. This decision legalized the segregation of public facilities, including schools, public transportation, and other public spaces, under the guise of providing equal services to Black Americans, despite the systemic inequality in practice. While the ruling technically allowed for separate facilities, in reality, the facilities and services provided to Black Americans were vastly inferior to those provided to white Americans. Growing discontent and the rise of the civil rights movement. By the mid-20th century, there was increasing resistance to segregation, particularly among the Black community and their allies. The civil rights movement was gaining momentum, with activists and organizations like the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, working tirelessly to challenge discriminatory laws and practices. African Americans had long protested against the unequal treatment in public schools, where Black children were often forced to attend underfunded and overcrowded schools while white children enjoyed better funded, better equipped facilities. 2. The legal battle: the formation of Brown versus Board of Education. The plaintiffs, a collective effort. The Brown versus Board of Education case was actually a consolidation of 5 separate cases that were all fighting for the desegregation of public schools. The primary plaintiff was Oliver Brown, a parent from Topeka, Kansas, who filed the lawsuit on behalf of his 8-year-old daughter, Linda Brown, who was forced to attend a distant, inferior Black school while a white school was much closer to her home. The other cases involved African American children and families from South Carolina, Virginia, Delaware, and Washington, D.C., all of whom had faced discrimination in their local schools. The role of the NAACP. The NAACP played a crucial role in orchestrating the legal challenge to segregation. The organization's chief counsel, Thurgood Marshall, who would later become the first African American Supreme Court justice, led the legal team. The NAACP's strategy was to show that segregation caused psychological harm to Black children, damaging their self-esteem and reinforcing a sense of inferiority. And their legal argument was rooted in the belief that segregation inherently violated the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, which guarantees that no state shall deny to any person the equal protection of the laws. 3. The Supreme Court case. The argument: separate is not equal. In 1952, the case reached the U.S. Supreme Court, where the justices considered whether the doctrine of separate but equal had any place in public education. Thurgood Marshall, representing the plaintiffs, argued that racial segregation created a sense of inferiority among Black children, which in turn harmed their educational development. Marshall presented expert testimony from psychologists such as Kenneth and Mamie Clark, who conducted the famous doll test, which demonstrated that Black children preferred white dolls over Black dolls, showing the damaging effects of segregation on their self-esteem. The defense: the continuation of separate but equal. On the other side, the defense, representing the Board of Education, argued that segregation in schools was a long-standing tradition and was supported by the Plessy versus Ferguson ruling. They claimed that as long as the facilities provided were equal, segregation did not violate the Constitution. However, the defense's argument was weakened by growing evidence of the inequality of the facilities and the damaging psychological impact of segregation on Black children. The justices' deliberation. The case was argued over several days in 1952, but the justices struggled to reach a consensus, leading to a rare re-argument in 1953 after the addition of Chief Justice Earl Warren. Warren, who took over as Chief Justice in 1953, was determined to ensure a unified decision in favor of desegregation. His leadership played a crucial role in shaping the outcome of the case, and he believed that the issue at hand was not only a legal matter but a moral one as well. 4. The landmark decision, Brown v. Board of Education, 1954. The ruling, segregation is unconstitutional. On May 17, 1954, the Supreme Court, in a unanimous decision, ruled that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. The court concluded that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal and that segregation violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The ruling was a direct repudiation of the Plessy v. Ferguson doctrine, which had allowed segregation for nearly 60 years. The significance of the decision. The Brown v. Board decision had profound implications, both legally and socially. Legally, it established that state-sponsored segregation in public schools was no longer permissible, laying the foundation for future desegregation efforts in other public facilities and services. Socially, the ruling sent a powerful message about the moral and psychological harm of segregation and opened the door to the civil rights movement, empowering activists to challenge other forms of racial discrimination in American society. 5. The resistance, challenges to implementation. The Southern Manifesto, and massive resistance. Despite the historic decision, many Southern states resisted implementing the court's ruling. In 1956, a group of Southern congressmen issued the Southern Manifesto, which condemned the Brown decision and vowed to resist desegregation efforts. As a result, many schools in the South were slow to desegregate, and in some cases, they were outright closed to prevent integration. Southern states implemented massive resistance strategies, including creating private white schools and using legal tactics to delay desegregation. The role of the federal government. In the face of this resistance, the federal government took action. In 1957, President Dwight D. Eisenhower sent federal troops to Little Rock, Arkansas, to enforce the desegregation of Central High School after 9 black students were initially blocked from entering the school. This intervention demonstrated the federal government's commitment to enforcing the Brown decision and ensuring that African American students could access integrated education. 6. The broader impact, the civil rights movement. Brown as a catalyst for change. The Brown v. Board of Education decision was a major turning point in the civil rights movement, which gained significant momentum in the years following the ruling. The case inspired further legal challenges to segregation and discrimination in other areas of public life, including housing, transportation, and voting. The Montgomery bus boycott, 1955, and the rise of Martin Luther King Jr. as a leader of the movement were directly influenced by the Brown decision, which demonstrated the power of nonviolent resistance and the importance of legal action in securing civil rights. The end of legalized segregation. Though the process of desegregating schools was slow and uneven, Brown v. Board of Education played a key role in dismantling the system of Jim Crow segregation in the United States. The case helped to set the stage for future civil rights victories, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which sought to eliminate racial discrimination in other public domains. 7. Legacy, a lasting influence on education and equality. Continuing struggles for equal education. While Brown v. Board was a monumental victory for racial equality, the fight for quality education for all children, regardless of race, continues today. And many schools across America, particularly in inner-city areas, still face challenges related to funding, racial segregation, and inequality. However, Brown remains a foundational decision, reminding the nation of the importance of educational equity and the fight for justice and fairness in public schools. Symbol of the power of the judiciary. The Brown v. Board of Education case also highlighted the critical role of the judiciary in shaping public policy and advancing civil rights. The decision showed that the Supreme Court could be a powerful tool in challenging deeply entrenched societal norms and ensuring justice for marginalized communities. A step toward equality. The Brown versus Board of Education decision remains one of the most significant moments in American history. It not only marked the end of racial segregation in public schools but also gave hope and momentum to the broader civil rights movement, inspiring future generations to continue the fight for racial equality and justice. The ruling remains a testament to the power of the legal system to challenge systemic injustice and reshape society for the better. Rosa Parks and Montgomery bus boycott, 1955 to 1956, a pivotal civil rights action. Introduction: a spark for change. In 1955, a single act of defiance by Rosa Parks in Montgomery, Alabama, sparked one of the most significant movements in American history. Her courageous refusal to give up her seat to a white passenger on a segregated bus led to the Montgomery bus boycott, a powerful stand against racial segregation and injustice. This boycott would not only change the course of the civil rights movement but also bring to national attention the systemic racism that had long plagued African Americans in the South. 1. The context: segregation in the South. Jim Crow laws and segregation. At the time, the southern United States was governed by Jim Crow laws, which enforced racial segregation in public spaces, including transportation. Black people were required to sit at the back of buses and give up their seats to white passengers when the bus was full. These laws, enacted after the Civil War, aimed to maintain the dominance of white people in all aspects of society, ensuring that African Americans were treated as second-class citizens. Daily struggles for African Americans. For African Americans, segregation was a daily reality. Public transportation was one of the most visible symbols of racial inequality. In Montgomery, black people were forced to give up their seats to white passengers, no matter how crowded the bus was, and were often subjected to humiliating treatment by bus drivers and passengers. Yet, despite these harsh conditions, many African Americans had long been organizing and speaking out against the systemic injustices they faced, often through religious and community organizations. 2. The incident: Rosa Parks takes a stand. Rosa Parks, a quiet rebel. On December 1, 1955, Rosa Parks, a 38-year-old seamstress and civil rights activist, boarded a bus after a long day of work in Montgomery. Parks was active in the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, working to challenge segregation and discrimination in her community. That afternoon, after sitting in the colored section, the bus became crowded. When a white man entered the bus and could not find a seat, the bus driver demanded that Parks and 3 other black passengers give up their seats to make room. While the other passengers complied, Parks refused to move, citing that she was tired and could no longer tolerate the humiliation and inequality. This small but monumental act of defiance would become one of the most famous moments in the history of the civil rights movement. Arrest and the outcry. As a result of her refusal to give up her seat, Parks was arrested and charged with violating Montgomery's segregation laws. Her arrest sparked an immediate wave of outrage in the black community and among civil rights activists. And many saw her act as a symbol of the daily struggles African Americans faced and a call to action to end segregation. 3. The boycott. Montgomery takes action. The decision to boycott. The arrest of Rosa Parks was a turning point, and leaders in Montgomery quickly realized that they had an opportunity to challenge segregation in the city. After Parks' arrest, the Montgomery Improvement Association, MIA, was formed, with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. being selected as its president. The MIA decided to organize a boycott of the Montgomery bus system, encouraging African Americans to refuse to ride the buses until segregation on them was ended. The idea behind the boycott was simple. If the black community could stop using the buses, it would economically cripple the system, which relied on the fare from black riders for its profitability. The power of collective action. The Montgomery bus boycott officially began on December 5, 1955, just days after Rosa Parks' arrest. The African Americans, who made up the majority of bus riders in Montgomery, refused to ride the buses, opting instead to walk, carpool, or use alternative forms of transportation. The boycott quickly gained momentum, and soon, 75% of the bus ridership was boycotting the system. The boycott lasted for 381 days, during which time the participants endured harassment, violence, and arrests. Yet, the boycott persisted, growing stronger as more people became involved and more attention was drawn to the struggle. 4. The struggle, challenges and perseverance, resistance and intimidation. Throughout the boycott, participants faced severe resistance. Boycotters were harassed by police and white supremacist groups. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and other leaders were targeted with bomb threats, and King's house was bombed in January 1956. And many of the black community members who participated in the boycott lost their jobs, and some were even arrested for organizing the protest. Despite the hardships, the community remained united, continuing the boycott and showing their resilience in the face of extreme adversity. National attention. As the boycott progressed, it gained national and international attention. The media began to cover the events, and television and newspapers brought the issue of segregation and civil rights to the forefront of American consciousness. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, led by King, helped to organize the boycott, and the movement became a beacon for the growing national demand for racial equality. 5. The legal victory, Browder versus Gale. The legal challenge. In 1956, the boycott led to a major legal victory. The Browder versus Gale case, filed by 4 black women, challenged the legality of segregated buses in Montgomery. The case argued that segregation on public buses violated the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause and was therefore unconstitutional. On November 13, 1956, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that bus segregation was unconstitutional, ordering Montgomery to desegregate its buses. This victory was a massive blow to the system of racial segregation in the South and marked a significant moment in the civil rights movement. 6. The impact, a catalyst for the civil rights movement. A national movement gained strength. The success of the Montgomery bus boycott was a game-changer for the civil rights movement. The boycott not only led to the desegregation of the buses in Montgomery but also sparked similar protests and boycotts across the South and the nation. It solidified Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as a leader of the movement and showed that nonviolent resistance could be a powerful tool for change. The boycott also inspired the 1960s Freedom Rides, the March on Washington in 1963, and other key civil rights actions that led to the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Rosa Parks' legacy. Rosa Parks is often referred to as the mother of the civil rights movement for her pivotal role in starting the boycott. Her simple act of resistance became a symbol of dignity, courage, and justice for millions of African Americans. Parks would continue her activism, working alongside other leaders in the movement, and became a symbol of the struggle for racial equality. Her act of defiance demonstrated that one person's actions could spark a broader movement for social change, showing the importance of standing up against injustice. 7. Legacy, a lasting influence. A turning point in U.S. history. The Montgomery bus boycott remains one of the most significant actions in the history of the civil rights movement. It was a turning point that showed that the system of segregation could be successfully challenged through collective action, nonviolence, and legal battles. The boycott demonstrated the power of organized resistance and set the stage for future civil rights victories. Continuing the fight for equality. While the Montgomery bus boycott ended segregation on buses, the fight for racial equality continues today. The principles of justice, nonviolent resistance, and community organizing that fueled the boycott remain foundational in modern civil rights struggles. The Rosa Parks' act of defiance and the Montgomery community's perseverance continue to inspire generations to fight for justice and equality for all people. The power of one act. The Montgomery bus boycott was more than just a protest against a single law. It was a bold declaration that racial segregation would not be tolerated any longer. Through Rosa Parks' act of courage and the collective effort of the African American community in Montgomery, the movement for racial justice gained immense momentum. The success of the boycott set the stage for future victories in the fight for civil rights, reminding us that even in the face of adversity, change is possible when people unite for a common cause.